My distant uncle left me his entire $150 million estate, and I told no one. When I called my family pretending to be broke, my mom was too busy and my brother laughed. But my cousin drove 3 hours with groceries, so I made a decision that shattered their world. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day so relentlessly ordinary that its memory now feels like a fabrication. I was in the quiet hum of the community college library, surrounded by the familiar scent of aging paper and floor wax. My world was one of Dewey Decimal classifications and the soft, rhythmic stamp of due dates. I, Elara, was a creature of order, of quiet predictability. My life was a meticulously catalogued collection of modest expectations and manageable disappointments. At 34, I had a small apartment, a sensible car, and a profound sense of being utterly, invisibly average. The phone vibrated against a stack of returned textbooks, a jarring intrusion into the silent sanctuary I curated. The number was from out of state, an unfamiliar area code that my mind immediately flagged as a probable scam. I almost ignored it, but a strange, uncharacteristic impulse made me answer. "Is this Ms. Elara Vance?" a man's voice asked. It was a dry, formal tone, the kind that carried the weight of legal documents and serious news. "This is she," I answered, my voice a librarian's whisper. "Ms. Vance, my name is Samuel Peterson. I'm an attorney with the firm Peterson, Crow, and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of your great uncle, Mr. Arthur Vance." The name landed with a distant thud in my memory. Arthur Vance. He was a phantom, a name mentioned in hushed tones at holiday gatherings years ago, always described as reclusive or eccentric. I had met him only once, at a family reunion when I was 6 years old. My only memory was of a tall, thin man with kind eyes who gave me a silver dollar and told me to invest in curiosity. I hadn't seen or heard from him since. "I'm sorry," I said, my brow furrowing. "I believe he passed away." "Yes, that's correct. He passed just over a week ago," Mr. Peterson confirmed. "We have been attempting to locate you. Ms. Vance, my apologies for the bluntness of this call, but Mr. Vance's will has been executed. He named you as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate." I leaned against a bookshelf, the spines of classic literature pressing into my back. "The sole beneficiary? I don't understand. We weren't close. I barely knew him." "That may be, but his instructions were unequivocal," the lawyer continued, his voice unwavering. "He was quite specific. Everything is to go to you." I let out a small, nervous laugh. "Okay. Well, thank you for letting me know. I assume there's some paperwork I need to sign for his collection of books, or whatever it is he left." I pictured an old house filled with dusty antiques and perhaps a few $1,000s in a savings account. It was a kind gesture from a ghost, nothing more. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. Then Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Ms. Vance," he said, and his tone had shifted. It was no longer just formal, it was careful, as if he were handling something fragile. "I don't think you quite grasp the scale of this. Arthur Vance was not just a collector of books, he was a remarkably shrewd investor. He was the founder and silent partner of several major tech startups over the last 4 decades. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. The library, my sanctuary of quiet, suddenly felt airless. "The estate," Mr. Peterson said, drawing out the words, "after all taxes and duties are accounted for, has been valued at approximately $157 million. The number didn't register. It was an abstraction, a string of sounds with no connection to my reality of overdue notices and budget meetings. 157 million. I thought of my grocery list, of the 75 cents I'd saved using a coupon on toothpaste that morning. The contrast was so absurd, so violently jarring, that I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. "Ms. Vance, are you still there?" "Yes," I breathed, my voice barely audible. I'm here. We will, of course, need you to fly out to our offices in Seattle to begin the process. We've arranged for first-class travel and accommodations. My assistant will be in touch to coordinate the details." The call ended. I slid my phone back into my pocket, my hand trembling so badly I could barely manage it. I stood there, frozen between shelves of history and fiction, feeling like I had just become a character in a book I would never have chosen to read. The number echoed in M. Why head a nonsensical mantra? 157 million. For a moment, I felt a rush of elation, a dizzying vision of a life without worry. I could quit my job. I could travel. I could buy a house that didn't have questionable plumbing and paper-thin walls. But the elation was quickly smothered by a profound and unsettling sense of dislocation. This wasn't my money. I hadn't earned it. It was a cosmic error, a typo in the grand ledger of the universe. My thoughts immediately turned to my family. My mother, Helen, and my brother, Mark. What would they say? I could already picture their faces, their shock quickly morphing into a proprietary glee. They would see the money not as mine, but as ours. Their love, always so conditional, so dependent on what I could offer them. A ride to the airport, a last-minute loan of $50, a sympathetic ear for their endless, self-inflicted dramas, would suddenly become absolute. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. For years, I had been the responsible one, the quiet anchor in their chaotic lives. I was the one they called when they needed something, and the one they forgot when they didn't. They loved the idea of me, the convenience of me, but I wasn't sure they actually loved me. And in that moment, standing in the silent library, a radical, dangerous idea began to form. What if I didn't tell them? What if, before this tidal wave of wealth washed away every truth I thought I knew, I could find out what was real? Before I became Elara Vance, the heiress I needed to know, once and for all, who considered Elara Vance, the librarian, to be worth anything at all. The inheritance was a number, a staggering one, but the real mystery, the one I suddenly needed to solve, was the value of my own family. The betrayal I feared wasn't about money. It was about a poverty of the heart I had long suspected, but never dared to confirm. The days following the lawyer's call were a blur of muted panic and surreal logistics. I took a week of sick leave from the library, citing a sudden and severe flu. My head was indeed pounding, but it wasn't from a virus. It was from the sheer weight of the secret I was carrying. The estate's lawyers were incredibly efficient. Plane tickets and hotel confirmations appeared in my email, all under a cloak of professional discretion. I felt like I was living a double life. By day, I was the same Elara, eating toast over the sink and sorting my recycling. But in my mind, I was navigating a labyrinth of trusts, portfolios, and staggering sums of money. During a long call with Mr. Peterson, I made my first official request. I asked him to keep my inheritance under the strictest confidentiality. He assured me that was standard practice. My second request was more unusual. I asked if it was possible to arrange for my salary from the library to be suspended without my employer knowing the reason. He was intrigued, but agreed it could be handled through a private payroll service that would simply stop the direct deposits, making it look like a clerical error. The stage was being set. My plan felt both foolish and necessary. It was a simple, painful experiment. I would call my family, tell them I'd lost my job, and that I was on the verge of being evicted. I would present myself at my most vulnerable and see what would happen. I started with my mother, Helen. Her life was a carefully curated performance of upper-middle-class success, funded largely by her second husband's dental practice. She managed a high-end boutique downtown, a job that was more about maintaining her social status than earning a living. I rehearsed my lines, my heart thumping with a mixture of dread and a grim sense of validation I knew was coming. I dialed her number and took a deep breath. "Elara, darling," she answered, her voice bright and brittle. "I'm in the middle of inventory. What is it?" "Mom, I have some bad news," I began, letting my voice crack just a little. "The college is making cutbacks. They let me go." There was a beat of silence, not the warm, concerned silence I craved, but a cold, calculating one. Let you go, just like that. Well, that's what happens in those public sector jobs. No security. There was no, "I'm so sorry, sweetie," or "Are you okay?" Just an immediate, critical assessment. "I don't know what I'm going to do," I continued, pushing forward with the script. "My savings are almost gone and my rent is due next week. I might be evicted." The sigh on the other end of the line was heavy with impatience. "Oh, Elara, really? It's always one thing or another. I'm just swamped right now preparing for the fall gala. You have no idea the stress I'm under. We need to find the perfect centerpieces." "Mom, I might be homeless," I said, my voice rising with genuine disbelief at her callousness. "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "You're resourceful, you'll figure something out, you always do. Now I have to run, the caterer is on the other line, we'll talk later." And with that she was gone, the line went dead. I sat on my sofa, the receiver still pressed to my ear, a cold numbness spreading through my chest. Too busy with centerpieces to worry about her daughter being kicked out onto the street. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Shaking, I forced myself to make the second call. My brother, Mark, was a top salesman at a luxury car dealership. He lived his life in a loud, flashy crescendo of commissions and conquests. His entire personality was built on the foundation of his own success, and he had little time for anyone he perceived as failing. He answered on the second ring. "Elara, what's up? You need to come down and see the new models. I could get you a great deal on a lease." "Mark, I can't afford a lease," I said, my voice flat. "I lost my job." A loud, booming laugh erupted from the phone. "No way, seriously, the library kicked you out? What you do, tell someone to be quiet too loudly." He was genuinely amused. "It's not funny, Mark. I'm in serious trouble. I can't make rent." "So, get another job," he said, the laughter fading into a tone of bored condescension. "Welcome to the real world. You can't just sit around reading books all day and expect to get by. Look, I'm in the middle of closing a deal. Big one. A guy's buying a convertible for his college-aged girlfriend. You know how it is." "So you can't help me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Help you how? You want me to give you money? I work for my money, Elara. You should try it sometime. Call me back when you've got your act together." He hung up. The silence that followed was heavier this time. My mother's indifference was a familiar sting, but Mark's mockery was a fresh, deep wound. He hadn't just dismissed me, he had danced on the grave of my supposed failure. I was nothing more than a punchline to him. I stared at the wall, the pattern of the cheap wallpaper seeming to swirl before my eyes. This was it. This was the truth I had been afraid to face. To them, my worth was transactional. When I was stable and self-sufficient, I was a minor character in their lives. The moment I needed something, I became a nuisance, a burden, a joke. But as the initial shock and pain began to recede, something else took its place, a cold, clear resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a failure. They saw a librarian who had lost her quiet little job. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no conception of the power I now held, a power that could reshape worlds. Their dismissals were not just cruel, they were catastrophic miscalculations. They had forgotten one crucial thing about me. Librarians are not just keepers of books. We are keepers of information, masters of research, and architects of order from chaos. And I was about to build a new world of my own. They had forgotten who I truly was, and they would soon find out. My childhood was a masterclass in learning to be self-sufficient. My mother, Helen, was always more concerned with the appearance of a happy family than the substance of one. Our home was immaculate, our clothes were always pressed, and our family photos depicted a glossy, smiling unit that bore little resemblance to our daily reality. Helen's affection was a currency she doled out for achievements that reflected well on her. Good grades, polite behavior in front of her friends, a piano recital performed without error. These were the things that earned a brief, warm smile. But emotional needs, moments of vulnerability, or any deviation from her perfect picture were met with a cool impatience. I remember being 8 years old and coming home from school in tears because I'd been teased. She was on the phone with a friend, planning a dinner party. She put her hand over the receiver, looked at my tear-streaked face with annoyance, and said, "Elara, not now. Go to your room and pull yourself together." I learned early on that my feelings were an inconvenience. Mark, being 2 years older and far more outgoing, adapted differently. He learned to perform for her affection. He was the star athlete, the popular kid, the one who could charm his way into her good graces. He adopted her worldview. That success was measured by what you could acquire and display. His first car, his first big commission check, the brand names on his clothes, these were the pillars of his identity. He saw my love for books and quiet solitude not as a personality trait, but as a failure of ambition. "Why are you always hiding in a corner with a book?" he'd ask with a sneer. "There's a whole world out there waiting to be conquered." To him, my life was a small, dusty footnote in the grand, exciting novel of his own. Our relationship was one of proximity, not connection. I was the one who remembered their birthdays and sent thoughtful gifts. I was the one who listened to my mother complain about her friends for hours, or to Mark G about his latest sales figures. I was their emotional utility closet, always there, rarely acknowledged, and only opened when something was needed. The inheritance didn't create this dynamic, it simply cast it in a brutally harsh light. Their reactions to my feigned crisis weren't surprising, but the sheer lack of any trace of compassion was what gutted me. They weren't just flawed, they were empty. As I sat in my apartment, reeling from their dismissals, my thoughts drifted to another corner of my family tree, to my cousin Chloe. She was my mother's sister's daughter. Aunt Carol had married young and moved to a rural town 3 hours north. We saw them rarely, usually only at obligatory holiday gatherings every few years. Chloe was 3 years younger than me, and my memories of her were fragmented but vivid. I remembered a quiet girl with bright, watchful eyes and a fierce love for animals. While Mark and I were being paraded around by our mother, Chloe would be in the backyard, patiently trying to coax a stray cat closer or tending to a bird with a broken wing. Helen had always spoken of her sister's family with a kind of pitying disdain. "Poor Carol," she'd say after a visit, "stuck out in the middle of nowhere. And that husband of hers, well, at least he's handy." Chloe's ambition to become a veterinary technician was dismissed as a dirty, thankless job. My mother couldn't comprehend a life not dedicated to climbing a social ladder. I hadn't spoken to Chloe in at least 5 years. We weren't friends on social media. Our lives had simply drifted in entirely different directions. But as I thought of her, I remembered a kindness in her that was utterly absent in my own home. She was genuine. What you saw was what you got. A gentle soul who cared more for the well-being of a hamster than for the label on her handbag. My test felt incomplete. I had confirmed the worst about my mother and brother, but what about the rest of my family? Was this cold, transactional nature a flaw in our immediate bloodline, or was it a deeper rot? On a whim, driven by a desperate need to find a single drop of sincerity in my life, I looked up the number for Aunt Carol's house. I felt a pang of guilt as I dialed. I was about to lie to someone who had never done me any harm, but the experiment had its own momentum now. Chloe answered the phone, her voice soft and a little hesitant. "Hello. Chloe, it's your cousin Elara." There was a moment of surprised silence. "Elara, wow, it's been forever. How are you?" "Actually," I began, the lie feeling heavier this time, "I'm not doing so great." I repeated my story, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I told her about the library, the cutbacks, the impending eviction. I braced myself for another dismissal, perhaps a gentler one, but a dismissal nonetheless. Instead, she listened. She didn't interrupt. I could hear the genuine concern in the silence on her end of the line. When I finished, her first words were, "Oh, Elara, that's awful. Are you okay? Do you have food?" The question was so simple, so practical, so human, it completely disarmed me. I'm managing," I stammered. "Where are you going to go?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "You can't be on the street." "I don't know," I said, and for the first time, the fake despair in my voice was tinged with real emotion. "Look," she said, a new determination in her tone. "Don't panic, I just got paid. It's not much, but I can help. And you can always come stay here. We have a spare room. It's small, but it's warm and you'd be safe." I was so stunned I couldn't speak. She barely knew me. We were practically strangers, connected only by a shared set of grandparents. Yet she was offering me everything she had, her home, her money, her compassion, without a moment's hesitation. "I don't want to be a burden," I finally managed to say. "It's not a burden," she said firmly. "It's family." That one word, family, struck me with the force of a physical blow. My mother and brother were my family by blood, but Chloe, a woman I hadn't seen in years, was the only one who seemed to understand what the word was supposed to mean. The contrast between her immediate, selfless offer and my brother's derisive laughter was a chasm that could never be crossed. It clarified everything. The antagonists in my life weren't just my mother and brother. It was the entire value system they represented. A system that prized image over integrity and wealth over worth. The phone call with Chloe was a watershed moment. The last vestiges of my grief over my mother and brother's betrayal evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. My experiment was over. It had yielded one devastating result and one miraculous one. The pain of rejection was overshadowed by the profound gratitude I felt for Chloe's simple, unhesitating kindness. It was an anchor in the storm of my emotions, and it gave me a new sense of purpose. This money, this absurd, life-altering fortune, was not a burden anymore. It was a tool. It was a means to an end, and I had just discovered the perfect end. I shifted from passive victim to active architect. My small, quiet apartment became a command center. I spent hours on the phone with Samuel Peterson and his team. At first, they were focused on the standard procedures of wealth management, diversifying portfolios, minimizing tax liabilities, establishing trusts. I listened patiently, but my mind was elsewhere. "Mr. Peterson," I said during one of our calls, interrupting his explanation of municipal bonds. "I appreciate all of this, but I have a more immediate project in mind. I want to set up a charitable foundation." There was a pause. "A foundation? Of course, Ms. Vance, that's a wonderful goal for the long term. We can certainly begin that process." "No," I interjected, my voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. "Not for the long term, for the short term, immediately." I could almost hear him sit up straighter in his leather chair 3 states away. "I see. What did you have in mind?" "I want to establish a nonprofit animal sanctuary," I explained. "A state-of-the-art facility. Land, construction, veterinary staff, endowments for perpetual care. Everything." "That's a very ambitious project, Ms. Vance," he said, his professional composure showing a crack of surprise. "It would require a significant initial investment." "I'm aware," I said calmly. "Let's start with an initial funding of, say, $50 million and see where that takes us." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I had his full attention. "50 million," he repeated slowly. "Very well. My team will get right on it. We will need to file for nonprofit status, conduct a land search, assemble a board." "The board will consist of one person for now," I said. "Me, and the director of the sanctuary is already chosen. Her name is Chloe, my cousin." My plan began to take shape with a speed that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The key piece of leverage I held was not just the money, but the anonymity the money provided. Helen and Mark had cast me aside because they thought I had nothing. They operated under the assumption that I was powerless. That was my greatest advantage. While they went about their self-absorbed lives, I was quietly moving mountains. My investigation became a flurry of activity. The law firm put me in touch with consultants who specialized in nonprofit management and animal welfare. I spent my days on video calls, learning about sustainable habitat design, veterinary medicine logistics, and the legal intricacies of charitable endowments. Elara Vance, the community college librarian who just a few weeks ago was helping students find sources for their term papers, was now discussing the architectural plans for a wildlife rehabilitation clinic. The irony was not lost on me. All those years spent organizing information, researching obscure topics, and managing complex systems at the library had prepared me for this in ways I could never have imagined. The most crucial part of the investigation was finding the perfect location. I wanted it to be near Chloe's rural town, a place where land was plentiful and the community was close-knit. The consultants found a breathtaking piece of property, over 200 acres of rolling hills, mature forests, and a natural spring-fed lake. It had once been a family farm that had fallen into disuse. It was perfect. I instructed Mr. Peterson to purchase the land through a shell corporation to keep my name off the initial deeds. The plan was to have everything legally structured and ready to go before I revealed a single detail to anyone. A week after my initial call to Chloe, she called me back, her voice frantic with worry. "Elara, I haven't heard from you. Are you okay? I was about to drive down there." "I'm fine, Chloe. I'm so sorry," I said, a wave of guilt washing over me for causing her such stress. "Things have been complicated, but I think I have a plan to get back on my feet." "What is it? Do you need me to come?" "No, not yet, but thank you. Seriously, Chloe, your offer, it meant more to me than you could possibly know." "Of course," she said, as if her kindness were the most natural thing in the world. "Just promise you'll let me know if you need anything at all." Her unwavering support was the fuel that kept me going. While she was worrying about whether I had enough to eat, I was signing papers that transferred millions of dollars to secure a future for her she couldn't even dream of. This was the clever trap, though it wasn't a trap for her. It was a net of security and opportunity I was weaving in secret. The real trap was for my mother and brother. Their arrogance and lack of empathy had led them to believe I was insignificant. They had closed the door on me, never imagining that I was the one holding the key to a kingdom. They were so blinded by their own shallow ambitions that they couldn't see the truth. And when the time was right, I would not just open the door, I would remove it from its hinges. The day Chloe was set to arrive was overcast and gray, a perfect reflection of the turmoil inside me. I had spent the morning tidying my small apartment, a nervous energy propelling me from one meaningless task to another. I was to come face to face with the one person who had shown me genuine kindness, and my stomach was a knot of gratitude and guilt over the secret I was still keeping. This wasn't the explosive confrontation I was planning for my mother and brother. This was a confrontation with my own conscience. When her old, slightly dented sedan pulled into the parking lot, I watched from my window. Chloe got out, her movements efficient and purposeful. She wasn't carrying a purse. Instead, she was wrestling with two large paper grocery bags. My throat tightened. She had driven 3 hours, likely after a long shift at the vet clinic, to bring groceries to a cousin she barely knew. I met her at the door, and for a moment, we just stood there in awkward silence. She was smaller than I remembered, with a kind, open face and tired eyes that still managed to sparkle with warmth. "Hi," she said with a small, shy smile. "Hi," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. I took one of the bags from her. It was heavy, filled with pantry staples, pasta, canned soup, bread, peanut butter. The other bag held fresh fruit and vegetables. It was a thoughtful, practical collection of food, chosen to last. It was sustenance. "I didn't know what you liked," she said as she stepped inside, looking around my small living room. "So I just got a bit of everything, and here." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "It's not much, just $100, but I hope it helps." I took the envelope, the paper warm from her pocket. $100. To my mother, it was a rounding error on her credit card statement. To my brother, it was a fraction of a commission. But to Chloe, a veterinary technician living in a rural town, it was a significant sacrifice, and she was giving it to me without a second thought. At that moment, the entire artifice of my plan felt cheap and cruel. I couldn't let her believe I was destitute for a moment longer, not while holding her hard-earned money. "Chloe, wait," I said, my voice trembling. I placed the bags and the envelope on the kitchen counter. "We need to talk. Please sit down." She looked at me, her expression shifting from concern to confusion. We sat on my worn-out sofa, the silence stretching between us. "The story I told you on the phone," I began, struggling to find the right words. "About losing my job and being evicted, it wasn't true." Her brow furrowed. "Not true? What do you mean? Are you in some other kind of trouble?" "No, well, yes, but not the kind you think." I took a deep breath, the secret I had guarded so fiercely now feeling like a lead weight in my chest. "Chloe, something has happened. Something impossible. A few weeks ago, I found out that my great-uncle, Arthur Vance, passed away. He left me his entire estate." She stared at me blankly. The name meant nothing to her. "I know we barely knew him," I continued, my words spilling out in a rush. "I didn't either, but he was very wealthy, incredibly wealthy." She was still looking at me, trying to process it. "Wealthy, like he had a nice house." I shook my head, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. "No, like $157 million wealthy." Chloe's eyes widened, her mouth falling slightly open. She looked from me to the grocery bags on the counter, then to the crumpled envelope in my hand. The pieces were clicking into place, and the look on her face was one of utter bewilderment. "Then why did you call me?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. "Why did you tell me you were broke?" This was the moment of truth. This was the reveal that mattered. "Because I had to know," I said, my voice raw with emotion. "When I got the news, my first thought was of my mom and Mark. I knew how they would react. I knew it would all become about the money. I needed to know if there was anyone in my life, in my family, whose care for me wasn't tied to what I could give them. So I did a terrible thing. I lied. I called them and I called you with the same story." I didn't need to tell her how they had reacted. The fact that she was sitting here, 3 hours from her home, with a car full of groceries, was proof enough. Her expression softened, the confusion replaced by a dawning understanding. She didn't look angry. She looked sad, sad for me. "What did they say?" she asked quietly. "My mother told me she was too busy with a gala to help," I said, my voice flat and devoid of the pain that had once been there. "My brother laughed at me and told me to get a job." Chloe reached out and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was gentle and steady. "Oh, Elara, I'm so sorry." There was no "I told you so," no judgment for my deception, just pure, unadulterated empathy. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said, looking at her, my eyes welling with tears. "You have been the only person to show me what family is supposed to mean. What you just did, bringing this food, this money, offering me your home. That act of kindness is worth more to me than all the millions in some bank account." In that moment, the power dynamic in my own mind shifted permanently. The money was no longer the main character in this story. It was a supporting actor. The lead role belonged to the quiet, unassuming woman sitting next to me. The confrontation wasn't about exposing villains, it was about recognizing a hero. I pushed the envelope back into her hand. "I can't take this, but I want you to know that I will never, ever forget it." My plan wasn't fully revealed, not yet. I didn't tell her about the sanctuary or the land I had already bought. That would come later. For now, this was enough. I had revealed the truth of my situation, and in doing so, had solidified the most important alliance of my life. She had passed a test she never knew she was taking, and in doing so, she had fundamentally altered the course of my future and her own. In the weeks following Chloe's visit, I threw myself into the project with a singular focus. The initial emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a calm, unshakable sense of purpose. My apartment, once a simple refuge, was now constantly littered with blueprints, legal documents, and soil analysis reports. I was building a case, not a legal case against my mother and brother, but a moral one. Every document I signed, every decision I made, was another brick in the foundation of a new reality, one that would stand in stark, irrefutable contrast to the shallow world they inhabited. The stakes escalated. not through dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet, inexorable progress of my plans. The Shell Corporation, named Silver Dollar Holdings, in a nod to the only memory I had of Uncle Arthur, officially closed on the 200-acre parcel of land. The architectural firm I'd hired sent me the first draft of the site plan for the Vance Animal Sanctuary. It was more than I could have imagined. A modern veterinary clinic, spacious, naturalistic habitats for rescued wildlife, quarantine wings for sick animals, and even a small welcome center for community education. It was a place of healing, of compassion, of second chances. While I was building this dream, my old life kept trying to intrude. My mother called me a week after her initial dismissal. Her tone shifted from impatient to patronizing. "Elara, darling, I've been thinking about your situation," she began, as if she were bestowing a great favor. "I spoke to a friend of mine who manages a department store. They might have a position in gift wrapping for the holidays. It's not glamorous, but at your age, you can't be too picky." I held the phone, staring at the architectural plans spread across my coffee table. A multi-million-dollar facility designed to save lives, and my mother was offering me a seasonal job wrapping presents. The disconnect was so profound, it was almost comical. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'll keep that in mind." "You should," she said smugly. "It's important to have a purpose, even a small one." Mark called too, not with an offer of help, but with a demand. "Hey, I need a favor," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "My buddy is moving this weekend and he bylaid on me. I need someone to help me get my new 80-inch TV onto the wall. You're not busy, right?" He was asking me, his supposedly jobless and destitute sister, to perform manual labor for him. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness was staggering. He wasn't just unhelpful, he was actively trying to use my perceived vulnerability for his own convenience. "Sorry, Mark, I can't," I said. "I have plans." "Plans?" he scoffed. "What plans? Job hunting, don't strain yourself." He hung up before I could reply. These calls were like small, persistent aftershocks, reminding me of the broken ground I was leaving behind. They steeled my resolve. They thought my world had shrunk to the size of an unemployment check. They had no idea I was in the process of building an entirely new one. My relationship with Chloe, meanwhile, was blossoming. We spoke on the phone almost every day. I kept her in the dark about the full scale of the project, framing it as me working with a nonprofit group that was looking to start a sanctuary in her area. I told her they needed a consultant with local expertise in animal care. "They want to hire me?" she'd asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "As a consultant, I'm just a vet tech." "You're more than that, Chloe," I told her honestly. "You have years of hands-on experience. You know what these animals need. Your input is invaluable." I flew her out for a consulting meeting, which was in reality a meeting with the architects at their firm in the city. We spent a whole day going over the blueprints. To see the look on her face as she walked through the plans was one of the purest joys of my life. She was brilliant, pointing out practical details the architects had missed: the need for better drainage in the quarantine kennels, the importance of southern exposure for the avian rehabilitation pens, the most durable and easy-to-sanitize flooring materials for the clinic. She wasn't just consulting. She was co-designing her own dream, and she didn't even know it. The irrefutable proof I was building wasn't a document exposing their cruelty. It was the growing file of legal papers that would create an unassailable good in the world. The final piece fell into place when Mr. Peterson's office sent over the incorporation documents for the Vance Animal Sanctuary. I was listed as the sole funder and president of the board. Enlisted as the executive director, with a generous salary and full operational control, was Chloe. I sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten countless lonely meals, and signed the papers that would irrevocably change all of our lives. My mother and brother were still struggling for status in their tiny ponds. My mother was obsessed with her gala, and Mark with his sales targets. They were fighting for scraps at a table they thought was the only one in town. They had no idea I had just built a banquet hall in Chloe's name, and the invitations for them had been permanently lost in the mail. The case was built. The evidence was irrefutable. All that was left was the final judgment. The setting for the final act had to be perfect. It couldn't be my cramped apartment or a sterile lawyer's office. It needed to be a place that was aspirational to my mother and brother, a symbol of the world they so desperately wanted to belong to. I chose Elara, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where reservations were made months in advance and the tasting menu cost more than my old weekly salary. I told them I wanted to have a family dinner to discuss my future. Their curiosity, piqued by the lavish venue, ensured they would be there. I told Chloe I had some wonderful news about the sanctuary project and that I wanted to celebrate with her. She was the guest of honor. She just didn't know it yet. I arrived first, taking a moment to compose myself. I had chosen my outfit with care, a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It wasn't flashy, but it spoke of a quiet confidence I had never possessed before. I looked not like an heiress, but like a woman who was comfortable in her own skin. Mark arrived next, looking around the opulent dining room with a proprietary air, as if he belonged there. "Wow, Elara," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Did you win the lottery or something? Or is this dinner going on a credit card you can't pay off?" "Something like that," I replied calmly, gesturing for him to sit. My mother, Helen, swept in a few minutes later, dressed to the nines and radiating disapproval. "Elara, what is this all about?" she asked, her eyes scanning the other diners. "This place is lovely, but surely you can't afford it. I do hope you're not putting on a show and expecting your brother or me to pick up the tab." "Everything is taken care of, Mom," I said smoothly. Just then, Chloe arrived, looking nervous and out of place in her simple blouse and slacks. She saw my mother and brother and her eyes widened in confusion. "Elara, what's going on?" "Chloe, I'm so glad you could make it," I said warmly, rising to give her a hug. "Please sit." Helen and Mark exchanged a look of pure disdain. The presence of their country cousin at such a fine establishment was clearly an embarrassment to them. Once we had all ordered, an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Mark tried to fill it by bragging about a recent sale, while Helen critiqued a nearby diner's choice of jewelry. Chloe and I remained silent. Finally, when the appetizers arrived, I cleared my throat. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I told you I wanted to discuss my future, and that's what we're going to do. But first, I need to revisit the recent past." I looked directly at my mother. "Mom, a few weeks ago I called you. I told you I had lost my job and was about to be evicted. Do you remember what you told me?" Helen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Well, I was very busy, Elara. The gala." "You told me you were too busy with centerpieces to help your daughter who thought she was about to become homeless," I stated, my voice devoid of accusation, just flatly stating a fact. Then I turned to my brother. "Mark, I called you with the same story. Do you remember your response?" He shrugged, a defensive edge to his voice. "I told you to get a job. It's good advice." "You laughed at me," I said, my gaze unwavering. "You laughed, and then a week later you called to ask me to help you mount your new television." A flush crept up Mark's neck. "So, what's your point?" "My point," I said, turning my attention to my cousin, "is that I made one more call that day. I called Chloe. I told her the same story. Chloe, would you mind telling them what you did?" Chloe looked down at her plate, embarrassed to be the center of attention. I just brought you some groceries," she mumbled, "and offered you a place to stay. It's what family does." The words hung in the air, a quiet indictment. "Yes," I said softly, "it is." I let the silence sit for a moment longer before delivering the final reveal. "The story I told you all was a lie," I announced. "I didn't lose my job, I resigned, because I no longer need it. You see, our great-uncle, Arthur Vance, passed away. He left me his entire estate. It's valued at over $150 million. The reactions were instantaneous and exactly as I'd predicted. Mark's jaw dropped. Helen's face went pale, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish. Greed, shock, and a dawning, horrified realization washed over their features. 150, Helen stammered, unable to finish the sentence. You're lying, Mark blurted out. You're making this up. Am I asked, pulling a single document from my purse. It was the certificate of incorporation for the Vance Animal Sanctuary. I slid it across the table. This is real, and it brings me to the real reason we're here tonight. I looked at Chloe, whose face was a mask of utter confusion. Chloe, the lie I told you was unforgivable, but it revealed a truth that has changed everything. Your kindness, your selflessness, it showed me what to do with this impossible fortune. I have spent the last several weeks using a portion of Uncle Arthur's money to establish a foundation. I bought 200 acres of land near your town. I've hired architects and consultants. We are building a world-class animal sanctuary. I paused, letting the words sink in. It's called the Vance Animal Sanctuary, I said, my voice breaking with emotion for the first time. And, Chloe, I am gifting it to you. The foundation will fund it in perpetuity. You will be the executive director. You will run it, build it, and make it your own. It's your dream. You've earned it. Chloe stared at me, tears streaming down her face, speechless. Helen finally found her voice. You're giving it to her, she screeched, all pee. Retentive decorum gone. But we're your family, your mother, your brother. I turned my gaze to her, my expression calm and final. No, you are my relatives. Tonight has made it very clear who my family is. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a joke, after everything we've done for you. What have you done? I asked, my voice rising for the first time. You have taken, you have dismissed, you have mocked. The one time in my life I pretended to need you, you showed me your true selves. And what you see before you tonight is the consequence. The public setting kept their rage contained, but their faces were contorted with fury and regret. They saw the money, the life they could have had, slipping through their fingers. In their moment of realization, they weren't sad for losing me, they were furious for losing my wallet. And that was the final, tragic confirmation of everything I had discovered. They were bankrupt in every way that truly mattered. The dinner ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive severance. Helen and Mark left the restaurant in a state of stunned, sputtering rage. They didn't say goodbye. There were no pleas for forgiveness, only muttered accusations of betrayal as they walked away, leaving Chloe and me alone at the table in the suddenly peaceful dining room. Chloe was still trying to process the monumental shift that had just occurred in her life. She looked at the incorporation documents, then back at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning joy. Is this real? She whispered. An entire sanctuary. It's real, I confirmed, reaching across the table to take her hand. The land is purchased. The architects are waiting for your final approval on the clinic design. The initial operating budget is already in a trust. It's all yours. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. I don't know what to say. Why would you do this for me? Because you were willing to give me a bag of groceries when you thought I had nothing, I said simply. You showed me what it means to be rich in spirit. This, I said, gesturing vaguely at our opulent surroundings, is just money. What you have, what you are, is true wealth. I'm not giving you anything, Chloe. I'm investing in something pure and good. I'm investing in you. In the weeks that followed, my life was scrubbed clean of my mother and brother. They tried, of course. There was a barrage of phone calls, voicemails oscillating between tearful apologies and furious demands. Helen left messages claiming she had always been proud of my quiet nature and that her dismissal was just a misunderstanding. Mark sent texts that ranged from "we need to talk" to "you owe us." I instructed Mr. Peterson's office to handle all communication. A formal, legal letter was sent to each of them, politely and irrevocably stating that I would not be providing them with any financial support and wished to have no further contact. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their social media profiles. It was a digital amputation, and with it came a profound sense of peace. Their downfall wasn't financial ruin or social exile in the traditional sense, it was far more personal. It was the stark, quiet reality of their own making. They had been given a choice between love and convenience, and they had chosen poorly. Now they had to live in the silence they had created. My life became intertwined with Chloe's. I moved out of my small apartment and rented a house in her town to be closer to the sanctuary project. We spent our days walking the beautiful, sprawling property, talking with contractors, and planning for the future. Watching Chloe come alive with purpose was my greatest reward. The quiet, hesitant cousin I remembered was gone, replaced by a confident, decisive leader. She poured her heart and soul into the project, her expertise shining through in every decision. We broke ground on the Vance Animal Sanctuary in the spring. It was a small ceremony, attended by the construction crew, the architectural team, Mr. Peterson, and a few of Chloe's friends from the community. As Chloe put the ceremonial first shovel into the dirt, her face radiant with joy, I felt a sense of rightness that settled deep in my bones. Uncle Arthur, the reclusive man I barely knew, had given me more than money. He had given me a chance to start over, to define family on my own terms. My reconciliation wasn't with the people who had hurt me, it was with myself. I healed the part of me that had always craved their approval, realizing I had never needed it. The sanctuary became a beacon of hope in the community, a testament to what could be built not from ambition or greed, but from a single act of selfless kindness. Standing with Chloe on a hill overlooking the burgeoning framework of the clinic, I finally understood. The $157 million was juice. Tea paper. The true inheritance was the clarity to see who truly mattered.